I never imagined that something so dark could happen to a child. When my daughter Regan started showing strange signs, I thought it was just a phase. The first signs were small, almost imperceptible. Her mood would suddenly change, she would isolate herself in her room, and there were nights when she would wake up terrified, but when I asked her, she couldn't explain it. As a mother, I tried to comfort her, to think that maybe something was troubling her, a bad dream or a worry in her innocent mind. But it wasn't. Things quickly took a turn for the worse. Regan began to talk strangely, mumbling words I didn't understand. In her eyes was a darkness I had never seen before, a haunting intensity that chilled my blood. Her body twisted in ways that were unnatural, and her voice, once sweet and melodious, became raspy, guttural. This was not my daughter. Her skin, at times, seemed to be on fire, but when I touched her, her temperature was icy, as if she were possessed by something far beyond my comprehension. I didn't know where to turn. The doctors didn't know what to do. They said her symptoms could be the result of some psychological or physical disorder, but nothing explained what we were seeing. The change in her was not something that could be explained by science. I could not rationalize it. When the tests gave no results, I began to feel an all-consuming despair. That desperation drove me to look for answers where logic could not reach. It was then that I met someone who, although he didn't tell me much, gave me a small spark of hope, a priest, a man of faith, but also someone who had heard similar stories. The first time I saw Regan in front of him, his look filled me with terror. Although there was something in his face that I still remembered, that expression was completely different, empty, as if a stranger dwelt within. The priest looked at me with a mixture of sadness and seriousness. He felt it too, and he knew what was happening. This was not something that could be solved with medication or therapy, he told me. It was something darker, older. What possessed my daughter was not something that science could heal, but something that only faith could address. That same night, the exorcism began. I stood there, watching as my daughter, tied to the bed, struggled against something I could not see, but felt in every fiber of my being. The room grew colder and colder, and the air became thick, almost unbreathable. Regan, in her trance-like state, began to speak in languages I did not understand, and her voice became deeper and deeper, deeper and deeper, as if there were several voices within her, one trying to resist, and others rejoicing in the storm they were unleashing. The priest recited prayers, but the force opposing his will was terrifying. Regan no longer looked like a child. Her face was marked by something evil, her skin was turning greenish, and her body, so small, was twisted with an unearthly strength. The voice that came out of her was not human, and the words she spoke chilled my blood. In her eyes, I could see a look that was no longer my daughter's, an empty look, dominated by an evil presence. The exorcism continued for what seemed like endless hours. I could no longer watch. My daughter's suffering was unbearable, and the battle raging inside her seemed to be winning for evil. For a moment, I thought I had lost Regan, that there was nothing left of her, that darkness had won. But when I could no longer watch, something changed. There was one last scream, a piercing sound that pierced the room, and suddenly, all was silent. When I awoke, the room was quiet. Regan lay in her bed, exhausted, but no longer possessed. Her face was softer, more human. As she looked at me, for a moment, I felt I had my daughter back. However, her gaze, although full of love, was also marked by the suffering she had lived through. She had been touched by something none of us could ever forget. The priest, exhausted and with a somber face, looked at me in silence, knowing that although the battle had been won, the war against the inexplicable never ends. Regan, his eyes still full of questions he could not answer, took my hand. And though I couldn't tell, I felt that something in her had changed forever. Regan's story, like many others, did not have a happy and simple ending. Inside her, an echo of what she experienced would remain forever scarred, and although her life went on, something dark was always present. The scars left by the possession were not only physical. They were the traces of the unknown, of something greater than any human being could comprehend. And though I struggled to give myself answers, I could never find a clear explanation. The only thing I knew for certain was that, in that dark place, the battle between good and evil had been real.